Welcome to the June Loose Ends. This is, of course, where I cover things, lingering issues, questions you might have had from the previous month. And then, as I often do, leak something as well. In the case of this video, and remember, if you have any tipped questions or questions you want to ask, make sure you put in a tip right now, and I will save them and get to them after I get through the Patreon questions and the leak that is at the top of this. And that leak is actually a pretty big one. So let's get right into it. I will put a timestamp here. And I want to say this because I've already seen some people try to downvote this video before it went live. I've seen some people in the comments here say things like, why are you bothering to say this if you're not sure? Hear me out. So a few things before I say exactly what I can now confirm about Zen 6. I have shown immense restraint, in my opinion, when it comes to telling you guys the clocks that Zen 6 is trying to target. I've known about what I'm about to tell you for, I believe, a month now, and kind of known for, I mean, I don't, when did that N2X Zen 6 leak come out that's now been confirmed by AMD? I mean, that was months ago. So I am not just telling you this because one person told me and I'm excited to get clicks. And that is because I know how crazy it sounds. I'm a PC gamer too. Before I started Moore's Law is Dead, I was just some guy who argued in the WCCF Tech comments before those became a dumpster fire. I know some people would say those comment sections were already a dumpster fire. Trust me, even 10 years ago, it was much more sane than it is now. So I'm someone who followed rumors, when I worked as an account manager just for fun. And I would resent someone just telling you something that they didn't think was likely or that they hadn't double checked. And so that's why I've shown so much restraint. But the fact of the matter is that this week I now have multiple sources telling me that this is true, what I'm about to say. And I pushed them pretty hard, everybody. I said, hey, you better be 150% sure, because if I say this and it's not even close to being true, then I'm going to look really silly. And they said, we're sure now, multiple people in different parts of AMD's, different parts of different, because there's multiple AMD teams that work on a given architecture, different, trying to hit various goals before it comes together as a product. I know multiple of those people telling me this is the goal and they are likely to achieve it. And here it is. That is that Zen 6 is targeting 7 gigahertz. If I'm being honest, it's actually targeting above 7 gigahertz. And for those that think that sounds crazy, remember, they're not going from N4P to N3. They're going from N4P to N3P to N2P to N2X. If you look at the latest TSMC foundry cadence, they consider N2X to basically be a node better for some customers than N2P. And with that in mind, that's almost 3 node jumps. Now, when was the time AMD did this before? Again, it's not exactly the same, but if you go from Zen Plus to Zen 2, you're going from 12 to 7 nanometer, and then you go to N5P with Zen 4. That was 3 node jumps. And in that case, they went from 4.35 gigahertz to 5.7 gigahertz. So AMD has done this before. And anyone who doubts this, they have done this before. And I think this is the biggest node jump AMD's done in a single generation since, I don't know what, Zen 1. So it actually is bears out in the numbers. Like, you don't need a source to see the performance leap they should be able to achieve. Okay. So with that said, let me just summarize exactly what I've heard about Zen 7 clocks and release dates. I actually have a lot of information here. Basically, what I'm told is that they are, without going into detail, they're definitely achieving 6.4 gigahertz or higher, and the goal is above 7 gigahertz. And I say that because it's not like when I say 7 gigahertz, there's not multiple sources talking to me and going, oh, hopefully we'll get between 6 and 7. And then I'm clickbaiting by going for, saying 7 gigahertz. No, 7 gigahertz is actually kind of in the middle of where they're trying to achieve, by the way. So I think, like I said before, you can take it to the bank. Well above 6 gigahertz. A lot of people think they'll achieve 7. If they don't, though, I think above 6.4 most likely. So again, I'm not 100% saying the exact clocks, but that's because, they don't know until they know. Like, for example, Zen 4, I believe, was targeting 5.5 gigahertz, and they hoped maybe 5.9 or something, and they ended up achieving 5.7. So they can overperform too. It's just know that when I say 7 gigahertz, it's in the middle of the top goal and what they're sure they'll achieve already. It's not at the top end. And so that's why I say it is fair for me to say Zen 6 targets 7 gigahertz because it's actually targeting at least that. Now, a couple clarifications about this though. I am, of course, talking here about Olympic Ridge, which search Olympic Ridge on the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel, if you don't remember, but that is the desktop AM5 variant. That is the variant that uses N2X. Now, conceivably, there could be some, like the successor to Fire Range, the 24 core laptop chip, not the Halo one, but just the competitor to Intel's Extreme laptop chips. Those could maybe use N2X, but besides that, I'm under the impression that's basically just the desktop model that uses it, and probably some ultra fast clocking server models that would share chiplets with it as well. Otherwise, I believe Medusa Halo uses N2P, Medusa Point uses N2P or even N3P. And so the majority of the Zen 6 family, the Venice, the 256 core uses N2P, I believe. The majority of the family uses 2 nanometer and 3 nanometer. I'm sorry, N2P and N3P. So just because on desktop, perhaps the whatever they call it, 10950X might hit 7 gigahertz, that doesn't mean I'm promising you Medusa Halo will hit 7 gigahertz. If I had to guess, if desktop is 7 gigahertz, then the laptop APUs will probably be, and again, I'm guessing, don't quote this part, but probably something like 6.5, 6.2 gigahertz. Now, of course, that's still like 20% or more faster than the APUs currently hit. So relatively speaking, it's a similar core clock increase. It's just keep in mind, I'm not confirming that I guess now it's called AI, an AI 5 or whatever, the AI 7 quad core APU or 8 core APU is going to hit 7 gigahertz. I'm saying that's what they're trying to achieve with the top N2X Olympic Ridge desktop models that are on AM5. So I still think that's very exciting. And I guess the final thing I'll do is let me put a timestamp here for release dates. From what I know, Epic is probably going to come out at the very end of this year or the beginning of next year. Remember, that uses N2P. Medusa Point then should launch in the first half of next year. And their APUs use N2P or N3P or both because of chiplets. And then Olympic Ridge, which uses N2X, comes out at the probably late next year. And I think that's another important thing for me to tell you as well, because I've seen people in the comments say things like N2X won't be ready till late 26 or blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, dude, whatever, but I'm telling you that those models are coming out quite a bit after the APUs. So that lines up actually. And that AMD is being aggressive, that's definitely true. But yeah, AMD has the money now and they want to be on the bleeding edge. They have announced 2 nanometer products before Apple. And so it's conceivable that even though it would be very quick to get to N2X, they want to do it. And also don't discount this. It wouldn't surprise me. I've heard nothing to the effect of this, but it would not surprise me if what AMD ends up announcing is something like they have some of their chiplets on desktop using N2P. And so they're like, here's the whatever it is, right? The 10700X at whatever gigahertz using N2P, and that's launching August 26. I'm not confirming that at all. Just giving you a hypothetical. It wouldn't be crazy to suggest that the N2X flagship then comes out like November, December. So again, anyone who says the timeline doesn't line up, it absolutely does line up. Most of Zen 6 is not using N2X, and even the N2X models could still come out next year. And I did not take this lightly. I really did hold back on leaking this sooner rather than later because I wanted to make sure all of the ducks were in a row because this is just crazy information. And yeah, I mean, the final thing I'll say about this is don't think for a second that this is the only thing I know about Zen stuff. I have diagrams and more information about Zen 6, 7, and 8. Make sure right now you double check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel because there's a lot more I'm going to have to say soon. All right, let me then move on to the next subject here, which is actually an Nvidia subject. Although it don't have that much to say, but I thought I'd get this in before we transition to more of the Q&A stuff. So let me put a timestamp here for that. Lucas writes in from the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon, which remember, you can join that and submit questions for free ahead of time, and says, "Hi, Tom. Can your sources tell if the Blackwell super cards have been moved up in the timeline to any significant degree? Is this a response to RDNA 4 being relatively well received, or was Nvidia always looking to refresh this gen around the current projected time?" Um, that's actually a very interesting question, that last bit there, Lucas. Thank you for writing in, because the original Super for Turing was not planned before Turing came out, right? The 2060 Super, 2070 Super, 2080 Super, those are all products that existed because Nvidia did think they were screwing it up with Turing and possibly going to lose market share to RDNA 1, which was much more aggressively priced and gave gamers, frankly, what they actually wanted at the time, which wasn't ray tracing. They wanted a mid-range card for $400 freaking dollars, not $600. So, in fact, I was told directly that Jensen came up with the name Super. That's a fun tidbit for you guys. But so, and then when it comes to Lovelace, was Super planned ahead of time? I don't really think it was. But now they've done it, what, right? Because there's no 3070 Super, right? See, they didn't do it with Ampere because Ampere sold incredibly well right out of the gate. So, generally speaking, Super's always been there for if NVIDIA thinks they need to fix their lineup. That's the point of Super. And so I've heard there's going to definitely be a Super Series at this point for the 50. And I would take that to meaning that probably they've done Super twice now. So probably the way NVIDIA operates is they lay the groundwork and very early plans for Super, but they don't do the green light unless they look at the sales and stuff and go, we could probably use it. Now, in terms of if it's being moved up, I just asked a source about this today. I have no evidence that the Super launch is being moved up. So I would still take it to be a quarter 4 or quarter 1 launch. In fact, it almost sounds like NVIDIA is getting even lazier with the release cadence for their gaming products than even we thought they were before, where, Blackwell was supposed to come out last year. Then it came out in quarter 1 because they just didn't care about it. I don't know. To me, it sounds like Super is not coming in a month or something. And I would actually watch the Super launch, because if Super comes out, like if they announce it at CES a full year after Blackwell initially launched and Blackwell came out like half a year late, to me, that tells me that NVIDIA is starting to move to a more of a 2 to 3 year cadence for their gaming cards instead of a, 1.5 to 2 year cadence like we were used to for so long. And it's because it's just gaming's not as much of a priority for them anymore. So, nope, I really don't have that many updates. I don't really have any updates for Super outside of saying no one's being prepped to launch this immediately, which tells me that despite hoping they were going to rush these out to compete with RDNA 4, I don't really, doesn't really seem like that's necessarily what's happening right now. All right. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is Nova Lake. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Hey, we all love upgrading our PCs, new RDNA 4 GPUs, more RAM, and the fastest Gen 5 SSD that we probably don't even need, but we want it to say we have that slightly faster loading time in games, right? But what we do always need is working drivers. Even top tier hardware won't deliver full performance if outdated or mismatched drivers are running the show. And even incorrect drivers don't always crash your system. They sometimes are just dragging down your performance. And that's where OS Logistics Driver Updater comes in. The program scans your PC and installs the best matching and manufacturer recommended drivers for every device in your setup. Their driver database is actually massive too, with over 20 terabytes of drivers, and it's growing constantly. And you know what? You can download it for free right now if you want to check for outdated drivers or that could be silently bottlenecking your system. So if you're chasing performance or even just stability, make sure you support Moore's Law is Dead. Support me, support Dan, and everyone who makes this channel possible by checking out OS Logic's Driver Updater through the links below today. Again, to make sure I say that right, OS Logic's Driver Updater, link in the description. It is free to download, and doing so supports Moore's Law is Dead for free. So check them out. And thanks to them again for sponsoring this piece of content. All right. I'll mention them again later, maybe, but let's move on to discussions about Nova Lake. Because we really do need to touch on this because the Nova Lake leaks that came out recently have caused quite a bit of consternation online. I've noticed. Um, so as a recap, I don't remember if it was like 1, 2, or 3 weeks ago, but recently a part of a screenshot of a document or something, right, emerged suggesting that Intel was briefing partners that Nova Lake would bring a plus 10% single threading and plus 60% multi-threading performance increase, which everyone said, and I think correctly, would be very disappointing. Now, the only thing I can confirm is that thing that came out. I've seen documents that look exactly like that before. I'll actually be honest and say documents that looked like that uh, were critical to a lot of my leaks for like Raptor Lake, which was dead on, and Alder Lake. You know, so I know those look like that. And whether it's true or not, someone has seen what these real documents look like behind the scenes. Now, and so I commented about that on a recent Broken Silicon, to which some people got mad. But I have to say this, sometimes, whether the headline's true or not, it is worth this channel discussing what everyone else is discussing, because I think the community expects that of me sometimes, is whether this is true or not, what do you think about this idea? Everyone on Reddit's talking about it. So let me just say that no one should attack me for reporting on what other people are reporting on every now and then. Okay. All right. Second of all, then I saw people say, oh, actually, this is Panther Lake or something. And so this is wrong, and everyone's spreading misinformation. Then Kepler L2 on Twitter responded and said, no, you're wrong. It's Nova Lake, which some people consider him a legendary leaker. So let's leave it at that. That's the situation. That leak happened. I know it probably comes from a real document. Some people said there's no way this is Nova Lake. It has to be Panther Lake. And then Kepler said, no, that is definitely Nova Lake. And now everyone's kind of just shut up because they're worried they're wrong. I'm not going to say whether or not I'm sure if it's correct, because I don't know. And I am not someone that claims, I don't claim to know things I don't know. All I know is that document looks real, but there are some things people should be thinking about here. And in fact, what I will say is the only thing I will say is my leaks about Nova Lake are the ones I would refer to, not other ones that I can't verify. But a few things that you should be thinking about while you're arguing online about if that leak's talking about Nova Lake or Panther Lake. Number one, it is not too early for Intel to be talking about Nova Lake. That's one of the dumbest takes I actually saw, is that there's no way Intel would brief people on Nova Lake. Yeah, they might, especially because the original plan for Nova Lake was for it to come out this year, and it's, you know, like everything Intel does, it's slipped. So no, that's just not true. They might be briefing partners that early. I've seen them do it before with documents that look like that. Anyone who says that does not have good sources, because Intel could brief people that early, especially if they're worried about AMD. And lately, they have been very worried about AMD. Lately, Intel's been telling their partners things sometimes much earlier than they should, because they're desperate to have them not switch to AMD. So that's definitely not true. Furthermore, who knows? Maybe it's comparing itself to Panther Lake or some Arrow Lake refresh, and so you need to add another 10% to that, or 20% or something. But contrary to that, though, I would say this: Panther Lake was not, at least at first, meant to be a top to bottom lineup, or it's ebbed and flowed as some sort of a pseudo Lunar Lake successor that's bigger than Lunar Lake. You know, almost think of it the same way as Tiger Lake, right? Where Tiger Lake was there next to Comet Lake and Rocket Lake. It was not like the thing replacing everything. And because of that, it would make sense that Nova Lake would be compared to Arrow Lake, though. Intel behind the scenes, for the most part, compared, for example, Arrow Lake to Raptor Lake. Now, you might think, so what? Well, yeah, but they skipped Meteor Lake because that's not really directly comparable. Meteor Lake was mostly for mobile, and the main desktop and really full product stack comparison would be Arrow Lake to Raptor Lake, and so that's why you had Raptor Lake to Arrow Lake quotes, even though Meteor Lake had already launched. So it's not crazy at all, actually, that Intel, a year before it comes out, would be telling their partners this thing is this much better than Arrow Lake, because it is the most direct successor to Arrow Lake in that it will be in mobile, desktop, everywhere, blah, 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 blah. And so that's what I want to say. You know, I'm not going to confirm either way. I could see it not being Nova Lake, I guess. But you're wrong if you think Intel wouldn't brief people this early, and you are wrong if you think they wouldn't directly compare Arrow Lake to Nova Lake, because yeah, they would. That's what they did last time. So the final thing would be I just hope that's not Nova Lake, and I hope that's ultra conservative. Although I think I saw Kepler point this out on Twitter as well. Intel's not known for sandbagging, so because I'm just saying what I've heard about Zen 7. I'm sorry, Zen 6. I keep mixing it up now because 7 gigahertz, so I think Zen 7. But um, Zen 6 adds 50% more cores and seems to be raising core clocks at least, I'll say 15%, maybe over 20% or so. So if you combine, like, let's do the math here. Like, let's say Zen 6 is only a 10% IPC increase, although I think it's probably slightly higher than that. And then you multiply that by 50% more cores, and then you multiply that by, let's just say, 20% higher clocks. Yeah, you get to double the multi-threading performance. So if Arrow Lake doubles core counts, which I've leaked it should, and only gets 60% more multi-threading like that leak would suggest, the math I have here seems to suggest actually Zen 6 might reach double. So that would be really bad, especially because, again, I keep bringing this up. Zen 5 X3D right now, according to Hardware Unboxed, is like 37% faster than Arrow Lake in gaming. So they would need 1 or 2 gens of performance uplifts in gaming to match Zen 5 X3D. And now I'm telling you that Zen 6 is going to likely hit 7 gigahertz, maybe even with more infinity cache than we've ever seen before with a unified 12-core CCD. I mean, I don't want to say out loud how much of a gaming performance uplift Nova Lake with its ELLC cache would have to go. But if it's already 30% and AMD's adding 20% clocks, 10% IPC, yeah, you do the math on the performance uplift in Nova Lake would have to achieve over Arrow Lake to match what Zen 6 X3D is likely bringing to the table. And it's more than 50%. It's not pretty if that's true for Intel there. But, what I would say is, actually, let me throw in this question here from a patron, which connects to this. Compressed iBlocks writes in, just like you can if you join the Moore's Law Z Patreon. It says, I know this wasn't in the subjects listed, but how do you feel about Intel's new CEO admitting Intel isn't even in the top 10 chip makers anymore, and that there's no way they'll catch up in AI? How do your Intel sources feel about this? I think it's refreshing to see that type of messaging and honesty instead of beating its chest over lackluster performance uplifts for about a decade now. Yeah, anyone that's like looking at these Zen 6 numbers and then looking at the Zen 7, the Arrow Lake, I'm sorry, Nova Lake, God, so many code names, the Arrow Lake numbers potentially being much lower. I mean, the Intel CEO just admitted they're going to be behind the competition for the foreseeable future. So it is what it is. That is what they are saying themselves. And that's why it shouldn't be all that surprising. Let's see. One more thing, actually. I just saw Pete Chappers write in about 7 gigahertz for Zen 6, and it sounds power hungry. Again, let me remind you, I didn't quite make my full point earlier. Zen 6 N2X 7 gigahertz is probably just very select server offerings in desktop. So that doesn't mean like whatever they achieve efficiency wise there will be the same in laptop. I've talked to some laptop AMD, or not laptop, people working on the laptop chips for Zen 6. And they say it's going to be more efficient than people think. So I'm not going to say what the power consumption is going to be at 7 gigahertz. I'm not going to say if the laptop chips are very cool and quiet versus a loud and hot desktop chip, or maybe the desktop chip isn't even that hot, because I don't know. And I'm not going to tell you if I don't know. But what I will say is, on the one hand, in addition to that 7 gigahertz stuff, I am also hearing that Zen 6 is pretty goddamn efficient. So again, I wouldn't take 7 gigahertz to mean this is Net Burst or Pile Driver or Rocket Lake from Intel guys, or Raptor Lake Refresh that melts itself and your system down. It's 3 node jumps. It is 3 node jumps. That is how it's faster. 3 node jumps, which AMD hasn't done since, I don't know, Zen 1 or something. So that you shouldn't look at these clocks and go, oh, how are they going to do this? Zen 4 was more efficient than Zen 3. In the top end, yeah, it used more power than Zen 3 did. Unless you turned on PBO, then it would, Zen 3 would boost pretty hot if you turned on PBO, to be honest. Um, they're not achieving this by making it hot and loud necessarily. They're using a bunch of node jumps. And so I hear it's efficient. Now, again, keep in mind what I'm saying. Let's say Zen 6 is like 30% faster than Zen 5 at gaming. And it consumes 200 watts or has a 200 watt TDP instead of a 170. I don't think it will. I think it will have a 170 watt TDP. But let's say that happened. Well, it's still more efficient than Zen 5 then, because it's giving you more performance than it's raising power. So that's what I would say. I am not hearing that this thing is a giant power hog right now. That's actually not what I'm hearing. I'm sure the top clocking models that push to the limit with all-core boost will pull power, but that doesn't mean they always will in day-to-day use. And I haven't gotten those messages yet of like, oh, we're having issues with like massive thermal issues yet. Like I did hear about Zen 4, I believe, before launch, is that they were having some thermal issues. So I've heard this before. I'm not hearing this yet here. Okay, so I wanted to make sure I put that there. And let me see here. Let's get to some more CPU questions. All right, so all right, let me see. Kyle Beckman writes in and says, would I still be able to use my MSI Mag X670E Tomahawk motherboard for a Zen 6 CPU? Yeah, should be able to. Remember, Zen 6 fits in AM5. It should be the AM5 swan song. And so anyone who has a Zen 4 16 core at 5.7 gigahertz may be able to upgrade to a 7 gigahertz X3D, 24 core. So this, I know Zen 5, unless you factor in X3D, didn't feel like as much of an uplift. It was better than Zen Plus over Zen 1 for sure, especially now that we've seen the drivers and the architecture mature. It is pulling ahead of Zen 4 firmly in benchmarks, including games now. But I know it wasn't as much of an uplift as Zen 2, Zen 3, or Zen 4, which were all basically 30% single threading. I think Zen 2 is more like 15, 20% single threading, but like the others were 30% single threading, maybe 50% multi-threading or more. But it does seem like Zen 6 is going to be a big kahuna, the big kahuna here, and probably make up for Zen 5 being, let's be honest, I don't want to say lackluster because it was a bigger uplift than Intel achieved, and that's their competition. But I will say it definitely didn't impress as much as the other uplifts. But this one might make up for it for a Zen 5 not being as impressive, and it will still fit in your AM5 motherboards, meaning if you didn't feel like Zen 5 was worth the upgrade, at least you can upgrade to this. So, yep, Kyle Beckman, thank you for the tip. You will be able to. Joseph Bedard writes in and says it's rumored that Zen 6 is going to use 2D stacking tech for Infinity Fabric between chiplets and I/O dies. Yes, I leaked that exclusively, I think last year. What kind of latency reduction could this garnish? Well, I don't know the exact milliseconds, right? But if you think about what they're doing, they're trying to have as little friction as possible between the chiplets. And so actually, I was told today by someone working on AMD laptop designs for Zen laptop chips from Zen 6, the Zen 6 family, that the latency reductions are having pretty profound efficiency boosts as well. So, I mean, I don't have an exact number for latency for you, my friend, but what I can tell you is, yeah, I mean, Zen 6 sounds incredibly efficient and incredibly good at gaming. And it's because of these latency reductions, but then also on desktop, these massive core speed and clock speed increases, which I will say that too. I think probably now the press is going to run with this 7 gigahertz information I'm putting out. Like it's big information. I don't blame them. And that's what people will latch onto. And it makes sense. 7 gigahertz, that's 3 characters, right? That's like not even, that's like, that'd be like a 3-letter word. Like it's 4 characters, 7 GHC. You know, it's very easy to just see that and latch onto that as the point of Zen 6. But I think you might miss the forest for the trees. Zen 6's biggest innovations are going to be in its latency improvements. And then also you get this fast clock speed, which is what makes it so exciting. So I don't think of Zen 7 as like piled bulldozer going for ultimate clocks. Zen 6 goes for lower latency and decent IPC uplifts, much better memory controller. That's the thing, the better memory controller, what did it call? What I call it, the something bridge, the bridge between dies for lower latencies, a new chiplet for that I leaked. A unified 12-core CCD that again will help with latency for apps that want to use more than 8 cores. That's Zen 6, the low latency, the memory controller, the efficiency for laptop. That's what Zen 6 is. And they're going through all these node jumps because AMD is going to spend. The node jumps are, and some of the architectural improvements, but the node jumps are what's getting them to this clock speed, right? Even the 3 nanometer Zen 6 is going to drive for really good efficiency. Don't think of Zen 6 as pile driver. It's more of a efficiency monster. And then AMD took out a big check and wrote a check to TSMC for the most expensive crap they could get. And that's why it clocks so fast. That's why, again, more node jumps than usual. Let me see here. Yeah, so that was Joseph Bedard's question. Let me see what the next tipped question is here. All right, so it's a console one, so I'm going to hold that and get through the rest of these Patreon questions about CPUs to try to stay on subject here. All right, so Jasu, I don't know if it's supposed to say Jasua, but it looks like it's spelled Jasu Garcia, writes in, or Jose, I don't know. I probably look really stupid right now. Garcia writes in, I apologize for stumbling through your first name. I'm just a bit tired on a Friday evening here. And he writes, hi, Tom. With the Z2 Extreme coming out and it being on par with the Intel Lunar Lake, and I presume you mean in efficiency, it crushes it in performance. Do you think that Intel is ahead in iGPU performance where they will only focus on integrated graphics and get away with desktop graphics so they could actually compete? I mean, that's what I've been saying this entire time about ARC, is that Pat Gelsinger, wasted a ton of money trying to do something that he underestimated how hard it would be to get done. Or I guess the people before Pat, but then Pat doubled down on ARC. It was really before him. And that eventually they're going to just hibernate their dedicated graphics division and mostly focus on integrated graphics. But like I said in the Intel effectively canceled ARC leak, which has so far turned out to be 100% true, I never said they were going to immediately stop making graphics cards, and I never said they would never make any again because you'd make some for data center possibly or something. Having said that, I got to say, them canceling a lot of their AI stuff upcoming, that would be something that would benefit from GPU development. So that makes me worry even more that maybe they will just entirely cancel everything. But look, the focus is going to be integrated graphics. It always was going to be integrated graphics, Garcia. And when it comes to the Z2, I actually want to say this was a Tom was right moment. This is something that would have, gone under the radar, but multiple times I brought up in Strix versus Lunar Lake comparisons that it's very bad that Lunar Lake is not always winning efficiency against Strix. Because Strix is not purpose built for handhelds the way Lunar Lake practically is. And I kept saying, guys, remember, there's going to be a variant of Strix Point that's binned with a special bespoke handheld voltage curve and perfect yields for that power consumption level. That's the Lunar Lake competitor. The one, that they just announced, which I believe is like 8 cores, 16 compute units instead of the full 12 cores and stuff. That's the Lunar Lake competitor. The one with disabled cores, optimized voltage for 15 to 25 watts. And now that they've announced that, I think it's going to beat Lunar Lake. Lunar Lake shouldn't have even been close to Strix in efficiency. It should have ran away with it by a mile because that's the whole goddamn point of Lunar Lake. Same thing with the graphics. The graphics shouldn't have been close. And the fact that they were, when I saw those reviews, I was like, yeah, look, Lunar Lake doesn't look bad. It's certainly better than Meteor Lake, but the whole point of this thing was to have an optimized APU that doesn't require a GPU. And if AMD's 12-core mainstream GPU, or I'm sure they call it premium because everything's premium to AMD now, but let's be honest, it's their mainstream APU. The Halo one's the special one. If that's even close to Lunar Lake in graphics performance and efficiency, that's not a good sign for Intel because Lunar Lake's really expensive, more complicated, and targeting a niche that AMD isn't even trying to target yet until the Z2 Extreme comes out. So yeah, that's what I think about that. And then let me move on to this question. Dark Side of the Force writes and says, any news on Nova Lake? not since what I've recently leaked. Would they implode and sync on desktop like Arrow Lake? Have you heard of any plans for LGA 1851? Nope, I believe it uses a new socket. Would they try to push out something to make it at least 2 gens available on the socket? This is a spiel I feel like I do every live stream when people ask me about Intel socket support. But at the end of the day, I think the reason we haven't seen a lot of support for multiple generations on sockets, unless you count 14th, 13th, and 12th gen, I guess. But it's basically Alder Lake Plus and then Alder Lake Plus Plus that they put on the same socket there. Whereas AMD does entirely new architectures. Like, I don't think the problem, although this is part of it, is entirely that Intel is greedy and wants to sell new motherboards. That is true, and it's really actually Intel's board partners want an excuse to sell new motherboards, and so Intel tries to make them happy. That's definitely part of why they switch sockets so often. But I think another part of it is, I'm sorry, parts of Intel just don't communicate with each other. Like AMD clearly, like you can go look it up. This is public information. AMD was considering putting Zen 3 on a new socket because it took them a lot of work to make it, fit and trace and like the packaging to fit into the existing AM4 socket they already had, but they put in the effort and they did so with communication between their teams. The people working on the Zen 3 core architecture and the final SoC were, working with we're talking to the Zen 4 and the Zen 2 people and saying, could this be done? Does it need to wait for AM5? And they work together to make it work for AM4. I think Intel's just like working on stuff over here and then sockets over here. There's no other way to explain why Intel wouldn't have tried to put Arrow Lake on LGA, was it 1700 or whatever it was, for the socket that Raptor Lake's on, because they thought Meteor Lake was going to be on LGA 1851. So that's the socket Arrow Lake uses right now. They planned a Meteor Lake desktop. That got canceled. They planned an Arrow Lake refresh that sounds like if it happens, it's not going to be as impressive as initially thought. Which I've already leaked. It's probably just higher clocks and a faster NPU. But there was this plan for 8+32. I mean, the original plan for the Arrow Lake socket was they were going to have Meteor Lake come out. What would that have been, like 2023 for desktop? Of course, never happened. And then 2024 was going to be Arrow Lake, and then 2025 was going to be Arrow Lake refresh with 32 little cores, and that would have been pretty cool. That was the original plan, but none of those people talked to each other. Meteor Lake got canceled. Arrow Lake refresh got redefined, from what I understand, and we basically just have one generation on a socket that should have had 3. And I just think half of it, yes, is the board partners wanting to milk you by making you buy new motherboards. But I do believe the other half is Intel does not communicate. I mean, look at Coffee Lake. What a joke. I mean, they had Skylake and KB Lake on the same socket. And then they tried to rush out Coffee Lake with 6 cores to compete with Zen because Zen had more cores. And then the second Coffee Lake iteration still required a new socket. That tells me that there was no communication or coherent strategy. They were just teams working, throwing crap out as fast as they could. And when I see Nova Lake likely going to a new socket, I can't help but go, I don't know. There it is again. Intel just not having any longevity, even though they kind of planned it and then deleted it, after it was already planned. So I think that's what you need to think about with Intel and a lot of their issues. And again, you can see this with like Lunar Lake too. Like, why does Lunar Lake's Lion Cove have higher IPC than Arrow Lake? So it's because Arrow Lake uses this crap Meteor Lake platform. Well, why would they have put Arrow Lake on this Meteor Lake platform if Meteor Lake wasn't even coming to desktop? These teams don't talk to each other. They don't. You got a team working on Arrow Lake, a team working on Meteor Lake, and the platform Arrow Lake would use, and it nerfed Arrow Lake's performance. And were they to have done a monolithic design or something more analogous to how Lunar Lake works, Arrow Lake would probably be 10% faster than it is now or something. So you just keep seeing this thing where they're working on different things that really shouldn't be different programs and should be more cross-company communication and more sharing of resources. And until that stops, you're going to keep seeing these weird things like one architecture per socket or something out of Intel. All right, remember, hit the like button. We have over 1,000 people watching right now. Let's get to 1,000 likes, please. I mean, come on, everybody. Quick Jumper writes in and says, the problem I have with Nova Lake is that there are too many questions Intel needs to answer. Why are there suddenly even more cores when Arrow Lake already had major performance problems with Windows compatibility and BIOS settings? Will this actually bring real performance benefits, especially for gaming? Did they fix all of the fundamental mistakes from Arrow Lake's poor launch, or are they just adding more cores and hoping that solves everything? Will it have the same reliability problems as Raptor Lake, where CPUs are literally dying and wearing out prematurely now that they'll have more cores on ring buses again? Will Intel price Nova Lake competitively when it requires a new 1954 motherboard versus AMD Zen 6 that's rumored to go above 6 gigahertz? Oh, it certainly goes above 6 gigahertz, buddy. Up to 24 cores, will still allowing you to drop it into an affordable AM5 motherboard that people already own. And finally, when AMD Zen architecture becomes the proven, reliable choice, did Intel pack enough real innovations into Nova Lake to convince customers to take on a risk? Because now Intel honestly is considered the risky brand to buy from. Yeah, I mean, those are all real questions consumers will unfortunately have to ask about Intel. I mean, and I'm a little worried about the core count thing too. Although I will say, the Nova Lake core count thing has been an option. I won't say 100% locked in, but like an option for a design, I believe, since 2021 or something. It's been there for a while. I've known about this for a while. So 8 plus 30 or 16 plus 32 was always a potential thing. So I don't think they came up with this a year ago or something. That's not how this works. Having said that, I heard about much higher IPC increases than are recently rumored, including some rumors by me. I mean, I basically still kind of heard it be at above 10% single threading uplift, maybe 20%. But if it isn't, what that tells you is, look, Nova Lake was going to drive for some early version of rentable units. Google it if you want to know what I'm talking about. I cover it in multiple pieces of content, including one with Brian Heemskerk, a game developer, who explains what rentable units would mean for people. But so all of that's out there if you want to relearn. But the point is, it would be a giant evolution of the core architecture for Intel, the biggest one since Core series came out decades ago, I think. And I was always hearing about double-digit IPC increases or more. And now, if we start seeing rumors of a 10% uplift, or even less than 20%, frankly, I think that tells you is the rentable units were at least partially stripped out of Nova Lake. Like, if there's some vestige of the rentable unit architecture in there, which it kind of smells like there is, but it's not really rentable units, it's at least gutted to a degree, and that's why it would have a lower single threading uplift than you would have thought it should. And that's just unfortunate. Fire Darkness 39 writes in and says, do your Intel contacts feel that Intel should focus on larger IPC increases a la Royal Core, or smaller but more predictable ones? But it depends who you talk to. I will say there are some sources at Intel that thinks they should do the safe bets only. I also know, and now this is of course public information, that the Royal Core team, this is the team that was working on rentable units with Jim Keller, just so everyone knows. I mean, they left Intel because they were sick of how Intel gutted their team's work on rentable units, and then they basically all quit. Yeah. I mean, so who do you want to ask? The people that quit Intel because Pat screwed up that whole program? Or do you want to ask the people on the other teams that think you should do a more measured, less ambitious approach? It just depends which part. But what I'll say is the less ambitious people are the ones still working at the company. So we'll see how it turns out, right? Okay, now I want to get to this tipped question here, because it's time to migrate to the more console stuff before getting into the GPU questions, I think. Let me put down a new timestamp here, 4834. PS6 performance. Remember, put those tipped questions in if you want me to get to them. I'm going to start moving through those now a little more. Bucci talks that ish writes in, thank you for the tip, and says, I did the math. PS6 is going to beat the 4090. What's your input? Well, what math did you do is what I would ask. Did we, like PS6 rumor? Is there something that came out today I don't know about? Left speech. What is this here? Samsung. Now that sounds. This isn't anything having to do with the performance really of it. No. So I don't know what math you did, Bucci. Talks that ish, but what I would say is just at a minimum, you're going to assume, right? The PS6 is going to double PS5 Pro performance. And I just say 6800 XT is kind of where the PS5 Pro is. I don't want to get into the argument now. It's actually stronger in some ways, weaker in others, blah, 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 blah. But if you double that level of performance, you get pretty close to the 4090. So I think it's likely the PS6 is as strong as a 4090. And anyone who calls this stupid, or you're stupid if you were the person that said like the PS5 and the Xbox Series X were, I don't know what the people said back then. There were people saying it was going to be as strong as a 2060 or something silly, and it just wasn't. Give it time, wait for node shrinks, a new technology to come out, and Sony's going to deliver something, probably about 4090 or faster. I mean, and to just put things in perspective, I don't know what they'll do for specs for the PS6. I do have a suspicion there might be a PS6S that's kind of like PS5 Pro performance, or almost there, but with a better CPU and AI features and stuff. So they can target a lower price point to try to finally win over the PS4 people who haven't upgraded yet. And then I think there will be a more expensive, $650 to $750 PS6 standard. If I were them, it would be at least 60 compute units to have full backwards compatibility to PS5 Pro ports, and maybe just double it again or something, right, to like 120. Just butterfly design again, so that you can disable all the way down to 36 for PS5 backwards compatibility, all the way down to 18 compute units for PS4 backwards compatibility, and up to 60 for PS5 Pro. And even just going to that with like RDNA 5 or UDNA or something, that alone would get you probably to like 3 times the performance of the PS5 Pro. So yeah, that would get you to about that level of performance. And again, it's not coming out now. It's not coming out next year. It's coming out years from now, everybody. To those that think that's unlikely, just keep in mind, by then we'll be on like the 60 or 70, 90. So people will be like, why are you talking about the 4090? EL writes and it says, Nova Lake's X3D limited to 8 to 16 core configs only? I haven't looked into that, so I don't really know which models they're going to productize with their V-cache competitor, which again, I exclusively leaked that was happening with Nova Lake. Anyone who wants to hate on me, I'm the one who leaked all this Intel stuff like years before everyone else. So you don't need to tell me about something I'm missing with Intel. I knew about it, and so if I think they're going to lose, it's not a good sign. Although it's too soon to say that for sure, to be clear. LG94i writes in, thank you for the tip, and says, would we see core on Zen 6? Core on core? I don't know what you mean by that. Do you mean chiplet on chiplet or cores above cores? I don't know what you mean. I'll drop a hint though and say this. That I have heard of a future Zen that does something almost like you're describing. So let's put it this way. Zen 6 goes for it. It just, the best node, the highest clocks, the lowest latency with a new chiplet layout. That's that. Zen 7 is a full grounds up architecture redesign that I've heard is radically different. So you're going to see wild things with Zen 7. I'll say that. But don't have the time to leak that now. And frankly, it should probably be double checked before I leak some of that stuff I've heard about Zen 7. Let me see here. Let's see, what are we on? We got console stuff. I got through there. Let's go back to Zen questions since I'm starting to ebb and flow. I'm weaving back into the Zen questions. Trigger warning for people who heard me do that accent. All right, let's see. Mr. W writes in, put memory bandwidth. So this is something that I think is funny because I've seen this a lot. But Mr. W writes in and says, memory support on Zen 6 will be more starved per core than Zen 5. I mean, Zen 5 just uses the Zen 4 memory controller, dude. That's why it's one of the reasons Zen 5 is lackluster in some applications. It's actually very good in many others. But, what you really should be doing is comparing Zen 6 to Zen 4, because Zen 4 was the one that used a new memory controller from Zen 3. Zen 5, I don't really think we should compare. So, all right, let's compare Zen 4 to Zen 6. Zen 4 recommended, DDR5 5600. What is even out now? Are we like DDR5 10,000 or something on Newegg? Like, let me check. Like, as again, I think this is an important point that anyone worried about 24 cores on desktop seems to be missing here. So DDR5, I mean, what is there? Is there 10,000? I've seen like headlines, but I don't know if it's actually for sale in a real way. I'll just do it this way. DDR5, and then we will sort by speed. Speed. So thanks, Newegg. Yes. Speed. Do you want your speed to be DDR5 or DDR4? There it goes. Now it's showing the full options. Yeah, so I'm seeing 9600 being sold. And then let me do this. Let's sort by 8,000 or higher. Forgive me, but this is very important to make my point. Okay. And then let's look for, let's just make it apples to apples. Let's see, where's the capacity? Like, let's make this a 32 gigabyte module, because off the top of my head, I mean 16 gigabyte module, so 32 gigabytes, 2 times 16, because I can remember off the top of my head the cost of previous iterations of RAM over the past few years. So, like, look, you can get DDR5 8000 right now for $165. So that's not cheap, but that's drastically cheaper than it used to be. And oh, there's one for $150. So that's, yeah, 150. That's getting to almost what I paid for 32 gigabytes of DDR4 in like 2022 or something, whenever I upgraded my system back then to Zen 3 and got more RAM. So you're getting to a point where 32 gigabytes of DDR5 8000 is a similar price to where 32 gigabytes of DDR4 was like 5 years ago or something. You know, so when you say, will there be enough bandwidth? Well, there's faster RAM now on the market. 8,000 divided by 5,600 is a 43% increase in bandwidth. That's almost the 50% core count increase, guys. And then there will be a bridge die for lower latency, a better memory controller to make up for that. I mean, think of Zen 2, Zen 1 to Zen Plus to Zen 2, all used DDR4, and yet AMD didn't add 50% more cores. They doubled the core count from Zen 1 to Zen 2, and then even increased the performance another 30% to Zen 3. So all DDR4, guys, all DDR4, Zen 1 to Zen 3. Double the core count. Like, what was that Zen 3 over Zen 1? Like 30% higher IPC, or like 50%, 40, 50%? I don't know. It's way higher IPC. So it's not insane at all to think that using DDR4, DDR5, even with dual channel memory, is going to be enough for 24 cores. AMD went from 8 to 16 cores, from 14 nanometer to 7 nanometer on a socket, and Zen 3 was fine with all that. I don't see why Zen 6 can't do that as well, just 50% more cores. Now, what I will say is, and something that will be interesting to watch, Mr. W, is will you need that faster RAM if you get the top model, right? Because like right now with Zen 5 and Zen 4, you get faster RAM for better gaming performance, really, and maybe some applications for multi-threading, but it's mostly for that, for the lower latency, really. Well, not really, and more bandwidth, but it's not like if you get the 8 core, you know, you're like, oh, you're safe with DDR5 4800. No, it's going to perform quite a bit worse than DDR5 7000, right? Like, you just want faster if you want more performance. What will be interesting, though, is if you get a single 12 core Zen 6, will DDR5 6000 be fine? I mean, I don't know. It's fine for 16 cores of Zen 5, 12 cores of Zen 6 might not need as much bandwidth. But then, you know, if you're going to go get their probably like $900 24 core 7 gigahertz monster, yeah, AMD might say recommended DDR5 9000 or better, which, remember, will be cheaper. Hopefully, we'll see what happens with tariffs by the time we get to a year from now. So that's what I think you should consider. So long story short, but I do think this is an important point, so I wanted to really expound on this, Mr. W. If they could go from Zen 1 to Zen 3 on one socket with DDR4 and drive performance that much higher with double the cores, there's no reason they can't do 50% now. And even if there were some limitations, whatever, they'll just say get the faster RAM if you get the higher core counts. Although I'm not sure that will really even be necessary, because again, as a brand new memory controller, lower latency bridge dies, or bridge dies for lower latency, And so it probably makes do with bandwidth a lot better than Zen 5 does, that just reuse the Zen 4 memory controller. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Um, duh, duh, duh. Naughty DJ Aftershock writes in and says, hearing Liputan's recent comments does not bode well for Jaguar Shore's survival. It sounds like it will not be competitive with Rubin, Ultra, and MI500. Yeah, I mean, Intel's openly admitting they're going to be behind the competition moving forward. It's a sad state of affairs. Let's see. Just got back from 7-Eleven during their free Slurpee day. Okay, free shout out to 7-Eleven, I suppose. Spencer Walker 21. When do you think a 15 to 20 watt UDNA chip would be ready for a Steam Deck too? UDNA. Well, let's say this: Medusa Point's going to be ready early next year. So I think by the end of next year, if AMD wants to go with the Zen 6 APU, it'll be ready. And then Medusa Halo, I believe, comes out 2027, as I've leaked, is the plan right now. I'm not going to say the names, but I know code names of a bunch of other APUs I'll probably leak soon as well. They're working on really exciting gaming stuff, guys. I'm excited for the future of APUs with Zen 6. But so when you say UDNA, you're presumably talking. I guess there's a chance maybe Medusa Halo, because it's 2027, can get upgraded to UDNA. We'll see if that happens. But yeah, so I mean, when's the soonest it could happen? 27, probably. I think maybe late 26. It's conceivable, actually, that they could fast track an APU for them. Yeah, so it's conceivable end of 26, probably, to be safe, 2027. I don't know the latest Steam Deck rumors, actually, so I don't know if there's been some leak that it's about to happen in a year from now, but it is very conceivable that could happen in about a year or two from now, if they really wanted it to, certainly within 3 years. And when did the first Steam Deck even launch? Steam Deck release 2022. So yeah, I mean, it is a console, and consoles tend to last at least 4 years. So yeah, I mean, that would kind of line up too. Like a 5-year cadence would be 2027. It's kind of a short console life for recent consoles, but I think some consoles should have shorter console lives, frankly, and that this stretch to 8 years for a lot of them isn't necessary. All right, so we got through that question. We got through that one. All right, we got some more console questions here. Better writes in and says, when RDNA 5 UDNA leaks? I mean, I don't know, man. I'd be surprised if I didn't know something by the end of this year, or know more than I know now. Let's just leave it at that, though. Actually, let's get through one more of these before we get back to the console stuff. Kira Boom writes in and says, "Hi Tom, I swore I wasn't going to upgrade my 6750 XT to a 9070, but this past month I found an ASRock Challenger RX 9070 for $600 and decided prices wouldn't get much better than that. So I bought it. That's not that bad. More than the performance, the thing that really surprised me was how much more power efficient and quiet it is compared to my old 6750 XT. Yeah, I really didn't like the 6750 XT, to be honest. I actually benchmarked one and tested it. I don't know if it was in a full review or what, but I actually tested this 6750 XT and was very underwhelmed. It was like 3% faster than my overclocked 6700 XT. I overclocked both of them, and the difference was 1 to 3%. There are games with the overclocked 6700 XT even won. So I will say the 6750 XT was kind of the worst of the 50 XTs, and wasn't really very efficient. It was definitely way beyond the efficiency sweet spot. Anyways, it goes, I wonder, do you think AMD regrets that it couldn't get a full lineup of RDNA 4 working? Well, it could have. It chose not to. Even without Blackwell face planting, AMD might have had a contender. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see if they decide to launch that GDDR7 variant I've talked about. I guess let me put a timestamp for that as well. 9080 XT. But so here's how I'd put it. The engineers at Radeon regret not launching a 5090 killer. Yes, and I think they believe they could have had one. Remember, I leaked that they canceled some 14 or more, 13 or more chiplet, I believe, mega MI300 looking crazy gaming chip that probably would have been $2,000 or more. I think they're pretty confident that could have beaten the 5090, right? Or at least been close. And they are very sad it didn't come out. Yeah, they are. The engineers are. Now, the business people, no. They're not sad so far. RDNA 4 is setting sales records for Radeon. All of a sudden, Radeon's got all this goodwill, and they're considered pretty much up there with stability with Nvidia, maybe even better in some circles. So I think from the business side of things, AMD has no regrets with what it's done with RDNA 4 so far. The engineering side, absolutely they regret it. But that's because engineers are like me and you. They're dorks. They want the cool muscle car GPU to come out because that's what we want to see. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it would have been better for AMD, right? And again, if AMD manages to launch some 9080 XT that's at like 3.7 gigahertz with GDDR7 and it manages to match a 4090 or more, I think they'll say that's good enough. And that was a hell of a lot cheaper to develop than some like dozens of chiplets mega thing. Like way easier to do. All right, so let's see here. All right, let's get to some console questions again. Xbox, PlayStation. All right. So Morgan Bright writes in, thank you for the tip. And he says, could Xbox put out an add-in card to do hardware acceleration for Xbox games on PC and not break contracts? That's a funny idea. Basically, an Xbox that you plug into your PC. Um, you know, I don't think so. I don't really think so. And I don't know why. No, I don't think so. Um, which I will say there's been some people misunderstanding that in that Xbox backwards compatibility leak I put out with Colin Moriarty. Check it out. Very one of the best episodes of Broken Silicon, I think. And people taking it to say that there's no way Microsoft could ever do backwards compatibility again. It's not what I said. I said the handheld doesn't have backwards compatibility to their previous gen consoles. And then I've seen some I saw the Twitter community thing attack me. Community guidelines. Twitter, the place where the community guidelines are known for being super honest, aren't they lately? What have they been saying recently? I don't believe it's been the best news for Twitter lately in terms of honesty and how accurate the community guideline thing is there. But, you know, believe me or don't believe me, but I'm telling you, I have multiple developers that would sue Microsoft if they tried to run their Xbox versions of games on PC. They don't want that. Number one. Number two. Um, what would that even mean if a handheld? I don't think I said this in the podcast. Ran backwards compatibility. Are you telling me they're now going to program backwards compatibility? Remember, the Xbox Ally, the standard one, has 8 compute units of RDNA 2. How the hell is that going to be backwards compatible with the Series S that has 20 compute units? It doesn't pass the sniff test. Those handhelds don't have backwards compatibility, and that's all I leaked. I didn't leak anything about a future console, although I will say I've said that the future console should probably the home console, if they launch it, should have backwards compatibility. Um, oh, YouTube just tried to change the volume thing again. Sorry if there was popping there, guys. But I have to say that, like, after talking with Colin and learning about what they're doing with their handheld and stuff, I'm not sure why Microsoft would do another home console if they're about to launch this like $800 handheld that doesn't have backwards compatibility. It just feels, and that's going to burn a lot of their fans. So I don't know. I feel like the future of Xbox is just hopefully some sort of budget PC that can hopefully eventually emulate games, but that's not going to be the handheld. And I think that there's a lot of legal hurdles to that happening at all. The one thing that I could see Microsoft doing that might solve this problem I've talked about of, breaking contracts is something that I think they should have already done with the Series X, by the way, is maybe the next gen Xbox is a bespoke APU again with full backwards compatibility with previous Xboxes, but then it can also boot Windows. And that would probably get around it, maybe, if it had to dual boot into 2 different operating systems to get there. Maybe that would get you there. But I still think an Xbox app that launches Xbox emulated games on PC is going to be a legal nightmare circus for Microsoft. And I can tell you the handhelds aren't backwards compatible. So that's just true. So people are lying or misunderstand what Lisa Sue said in that video if they think that. Let's see here. Okay, here's another one. Bespoke exclamation point, bespoke bespoke is premium supporter, writes in from the Patreon. How screwed do you think Xbox would be if they launched their next gen in 2026, 1 to 2 years before PS6? Devs already hardly support the Series X and S. Imagine adding a new Next XS and a handheld. So, yeah, I don't know if they would be screwed or not. Uh, the way I'm going to answer this question, bespoke exclamation point, bespoke premium supporter. Thank you for writing in. Is like this. What do I think Microsoft should do? I think if Microsoft really cares about a console footprint, what they need to do is launch a $500 to $600, not a $800 box that sets a new gold standard for the minimum of PC gaming. What would that be? I don't know. Maybe at least, Strix Halo performance, which actually, on that note, actually have a Strix Halo product right here that I am testing. And so far, I'm quite impressed. Should see a review about that come out in the next couple weeks. But, if they could get you something like this, something that's stronger than a Series X, but probably not as strong as a PS6, I don't know what you would target now. Probably RX 9070 performance, something like that. Um, you know, and then you had that in a bespoke APU that had backwards compatibility, but also booted Windows with like 32 gigs of RAM total or something. And then that thing could be sold for $599, meaning they're not really making a profit on it, but it's not really losing money either. Again, a lot of these PC components have massive profit margins, just so you know. I think for $599, and they're trying to profit off of the Series X as well. I know what you're thinking. How would this be cheaper than the Series X? Well, because they wouldn't be milking you as badly. But if they could do something like that for $599, I think that would be awesome. And I think if they could get that out a year before the PS6, that'd be like a 360 situation all over again, where you're undercutting the competition, launching early, and giving people features that they want before the competition does. The problem is, I don't think that's what Microsoft's going to do. I don't think they care. I don't think they give a shit about their fans anymore. I mean, it's the most anti-consumer moves I've seen in recent memory. The moves coming out of Xbox lately, just gutting studios, treating gamers like they're stupid, and like putting a sticker on an Asus handheld and saying it's an Xbox. It's not. Putting a sticker on a Meta VR device and pretending it's an Xbox. It's not. They're just whoring out the brand, getting as many pennies as they can on the way out the door. I think what they're going to end up doing is, hopefully it's bespoke and has backwards compatibility, but launching some very expensive Xbox console in 2 years. That's what I think they're going to do. What I wish they would do is a $599 box that gets back to basics while letting you run Windows, and undercut Sony. That's real competition. But that's not what they did last gen. That's not what they are probably going to do with the handheld. I don't think they care really about gamers anymore. And I'm just calling strikes, right? I'm calling goals and strikes here. Call me a hater if you want, but what's her name? I think this is a joke I like making. Yeah. The biggest, because people will call me a PlayStation fanboy for breaking bad Xbox news. Well, that would make Sarah Bond, soon to be the head of Xbox, the biggest PlayStation fanboy on earth, because her and Phil Spencer have not broke more bad Xbox news than anyone else by a long shot. So it is a sad state of affairs, everybody. And I'm just being honest. Let's see. Falto writes in and says, what are your thoughts on the state of OLED monitors in mid 2025? I mean, my thoughts on OLED monitors are, this is the new standard, and get OLED. My laptop has OLED. I have an OLED screen in front of me here, another OLED screen there. I still have an old IPS color accurate display that I keep on the side here that I'm still using. Eventually that will probably become an OLED one when it's replaced, and like give it to my girlfriend or someone else to use as their display. I mean, look, OLED's here. It's made it. It's good to go. You should expect OLED in your products if they're premium. I think they just look so much better. Now, obviously, there's competitors like mini LED and so on and so forth, and we can get into a debate about how good those are. But it's kind of time to get OLED if you have the money now. And you look at the prices of some products, although frankly they're actually pretty down this month. And you can complain about graphics card prices. I'm sure the 5080 costs way too much still. I'm not even going to check. But it doesn't is monitors. And if I even used a 1440p OLED monitor for a while, going from a 4K 120 IPS display, because it was worth it. OLED just looks sharper at the same or even a lower resolution. It's just better. And yeah, look, if I'm on I'm on Newegg right now. You can get a 27-inch 240 hertz OLED 1440p monitor, which I believe with OLED 1440p is fine. I've been kind of a shill for 4K. I like high resolution, I really do. But when you're an OLED 27 inches, 1440p is all right because OLED just looks sharper. That's $500. I mean, what's the cheapest one here? They're even selling like portable monitors for less than 200 now that are OLED. Um, yeah, and there's a 4K one. Wow. That's how cheap these are getting. Jeez. Here's a $550 one. That's a 360 hertz QD OLED. Wow, 360 hertz 1440p. Yeah, OLED's here. OLED is reasonably priced now. Here's a 4K 240 hertz one for 760. I have a 4K 240 hertz OLED Alienware monitor that I got on sale a few months ago, I believe, for like 750 or 700. They're cheap enough that I think OLED is here and it works. And to the people that are worried about burn-in, I've never had burn-in on an OLED product in my life, and I've been using them since 2018, 2019. I had one of the first big HP OLED TVs. I replaced it with a new one years later. I had an OLED laptop from HP in 2021. No burn-in, no burn-in on these monitors. And I leave them on too. I don't do any safety stuff really. Like, it's just on, and I'll walk away for hours and come back, no burn-in. So I'm not saying you can't get burn-in, but I think with reasonable usage and the reasonable life of the product, you're not going to see it. I say this a lot. The biggest comparison I would make to people worrying about OLED burn-in right now, unless you're someone that just leaves an Excel spreadsheet on, for 10 hours a day, then maybe it's a concern. But even then, I'm starting to become skeptical. Is when SSDs first started becoming popular in desktops like 15 years ago, or even 20 years ago by now, there were people I remember online on Tom's Hardware arguing that you can't get an SSD because technically it has a limited amount of reads and writes, and it will be a read-only disk after how many hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes of writes. And because of that, you should still get a hard drive because it won't happen. It's really a similar argument. Is you're saying, well, there's this new part of this new technology that can make it, whether it's burn-in or a limited amount of read and writes, this is going to make this thing break eventually. And it's like, well, that's technically true. It will break eventually from that, but not before everything else does. Like, there are other components in a monitor before the screen that will likely break. And that's going to last probably a decade. That's my point, right? Is same thing with the SSD. And the funny thing is a lot of those, even the early SSDs, I think Tom's Hardware and some websites did constant read and writing to them for like 5 years straight, just left them in the lab going over and over and over again until they broke. And they found they lasted like way longer than the stated warranty would have covered, like way longer. And so it's really not technically, will an SSD have a limited amount of read and writes? Yes. Are you ever going to see that? No, not any normal user. And I think that's mostly true with OLED and burn-in right now. So that's my thoughts on OLED. Again, you can disagree if you want. You can type, I have had burn-in. I've had multiple OLED TVs for 6 years now, multiple OLED laptops. I've never had burn-in once in my life. And I use them all the time and leave them on all day. So your mileage may vary, but take it from me, it's not something I worry about. All right, let's see here. We got some more Zen 6 questions. Scott 2 writes in, do you think Zen 6 motherboards will have any cam support? I don't know. I haven't asked about that. I'd be surprised if there's a new chipset, which there probably will be, they wouldn't have some special new memory or something cam support. But I can't honestly say I know. Glass Poopo writes in and says, I'm concerned about stable RAM above 7200 mega transfer. Many current X870 don't support CUDA redrivers. Is Zen 6 going to break AM5 backwards compatibility? No, I don't think so. It's just if you have an X870 motherboard, again, I don't know this, so don't freak out. I don't know this for a fact. Let me put this down. This is a good question. RAM questions. I like this. But look, it's conceivable that Zen 6 in your X870 may be limited to 7200 mega transfer. I'm not saying that's going to happen. It's going to have a better IO die with a better memory controller anyways. So it's conceivable with the right BIOS updates. You'll be able to drive higher RAM speeds in the same motherboard. I think we saw Zen 2 and Zen 3 especially do this with older AM4 motherboards. Yes, you would want the newest, whatever it was, X570 if you could get it, but like the memory controller itself was better than Zen 1's memory controller, so it could drive higher RAM speeds anyways. So I wouldn't assume that if your Zen 5 CPU is only stable up to 7200 right now, that in the same motherboard, Zen 6 might get to 8000. Now, will it maybe not get to like 10,000 unless you use the newest chipset? I don't know. But again, I don't think this is something you need to worry about, Glass Poopo. I don't. I think Zen 6 is going to have enough memory bandwidth. I think it will. Or they wouldn't be doing it unless they thought it would. And, I put out a short highlighting this point I made on a recent podcast. They considered a 32 core Zen 6. It was going to apparently be some hybrid design with like 8 Zen 6 and 8 Zen 6C cores on each chiplet. So 8 plus 8, two of those chiplets for 32 cores total, and they decided not to. Now, I think a large part of that is they found, well, 12 unified cores clocked as fast as possible is probably what consumers want more than 8 big cores and 8 medium cores, if you will. But another consideration may have been memory bandwidth. They may have gone, 24 cores is right about where DDR5 is good enough. If it's fast, going to 32 might be too much. So there's a chance that canceled 32 core is, again, evidence that, like, no, I mean, it wouldn't be enough maybe at 32, but 24, they're sure that's the sweet spot where it's still going to be fine. Let me see here. What do we got? Oh, more information from sources. It's exciting. Make sure you are subscribed. You're gonna want to see the leaks coming out in the next couple of weeks about Zen stuff. I'm just touching the very top of the iceberg with what I'm telling you today. Let me see. Overthrown writes in, says, no question, just thankful for all the great leaks and information you provide to all of us. Greetings from Croatia. Oh, greetings to you. Must be really late there, but I guess it's Friday night, right? Thank you for the tip for sure. Black Sands writes in and says, I am super late. But have you heard anything about the possibility of FSR4 and handheld devices in the future? Maybe with the Z2 Extreme or something? When is the Z2 Extreme launch? Actually, this is a good question. Extreme. Oh, there it is. Release date. Oh, expected to release like end of this year, early next year. Huh. Really? All right. Well, so here's what I would think. The Z2 Extreme isn't even out yet, Black Sands, and now we know that modders have hacked FSR4 to kind of work on RDNA 3 and 2. So what does that tell you? It's possible. I've already leaked to you AMD's working on FSR4 for RDNA 3. We have other leaks out there, and hackers have got it to kind of work already before it's official. But the Z2 Extreme isn't out until next year or end of this year. My suspicion would be that AMD is waiting for this up, not waiting. They don't feel like they need it out until they roll out all of these new handhelds and maybe until Gorgon Point as well. And so if you think about it, Gorgon Point, which should be announced like at the end of this year or something, all of this stuff, Gorgon Point, Z2 Extreme which will be in, of course, the Xbox handheld. The Asus handheld with an Xbox sticker on it is what it really should be called. All of those would make use of an FSR4 that's been ported to RDNA 3 or 3.5. And that's when they'll need it ready. So I would say I'd be very surprised if FSR4 wasn't on RDNA 3, meaning on the Z2 Extreme, by the end of this year. But you got to remember, they probably want it to be perfect. They're probably trying, like, I believe the people that hacked it on to RDNA 3, right? Didn't they find that FSR4 running on RDNA 3 gave you only like a 5 or 10% performance boost, but it did look clearer than native or something. So it was like a much higher quality than FSR 3.1, but only 5-10%. My suspicion would be AMD's trying to get it so that the implementation of FSR4 on RDNA 3, and especially at RDNA 3.5, is something where it like looks 99% as good as FSR4 on RDNA 4, but they probably want it to be like a 15% performance uplift or 20 instead of like the 30 that you would get with RDNA 4. And they're trying to get it optimized enough so it's ready to show off, so that when they show it off, they don't want reviews where they're like, hey, it only gives you a 5% boost. They probably want it to be a notable boost. Will still kind of be in a teaser for RDNA 4. Like, hey, you can 15% more frame rates right now. If you upgrade, guess what? You can get 30% more frames with FSR 4 on the newer architectures. All right, let me see. I guess let me put down a timestamp for that, huh? was that like 5 minutes ago? RDNA 3, FSR 4. EL writes in, thank you for the tip, and says, has Mark Cerny become the head of Radeon pro bono? I don't know. Sometimes it feels like that. No, but Sony and AMD like working together. I've been covering this since the start of my channel that I keep hearing AMD say good things about the Sony people. So I'm no surprises they're working together that much. Spencer Walker 21 writes in, thank you for the tip. Let's see this. 2 PC mini PC Ryzen AI 7 Pro 360 with an 880M. Okay, so that's Strix. iGPU only costs $365, and it has 3 Zen 5 and 5 Zen 5C cores. Really, AI 7 Pro 360. So where are you saying this cost here for 365? You mean like on the open? Oh, I see it. There's a WCCF Tech article starting at 362. Okay, but that's being sold in China. Is it? Okay, starting at just so, but what does that convert to? So 360, 2599 Chinese 1 to USD. No, it would be. All right, so that is with that version of it too. Yeah, I don't know. Look, this is leaking, it seems, from the Chinese market. So who knows what that really means here for sure. But yeah, I mean, I'd say that's a pretty good budget system. An 880M system for $360. If that happens, that's your, it's not as strong as a PS5, but it's $100 cheaper or something than or I don't know if it's 100. It's cheaper than a PS5, and it's certainly stronger than a Series S. So yeah, I mean, especially if you could get that with 32 gigabytes of RAM, that's pretty good. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. It's getting cheaper. The word donor says, is Medusa Halo really 256-bit? Yes. That's really low. No, that's double the memory bus width of most APUs and the same bus width as the 9070 XT that manages to compete with the 5070 Ti. So the 256-bit isn't small. Obviously, it doesn't have GDDR6, but yeah, most testing I've seen of AMD's recent APUs, I'm sorry, of the Halo ones, is that they're not at all bandwidth starved. Like that the Infinity Cache really does wonders for them. Finally, in an APU. Pray that Medusa Point will have Infinity Cache, by the way. I think it will, but pray. All right, let me see. Any more questions here? I'm looking at the Moore's Law is Dead after video chat channel as well on the Discord. So if you have any final questions and you're a supporter on Patreon, you can put those in here. But I'm probably going to wrap this up in like 5 to 10 minutes, everybody. So you can already probably tell I'm rambling here. Actually, let me make a note about this too. Edit out the horrible start for future watchers. Scott too writes in and says AMD should try a licensed PS brand for their GPUs. Yeah, me and Brian Heemskirk joked about that. We actually put out a short about this opinion that Brian had of like, God, Radeon makes great GPUs. What do they need to brand them as PlayStation for people to finally freaking buy them? It's funny. It's a joke, of course, though. They're not going to do that. If you heard anything on MRDIMM or CAM2 on Zen 6? No, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but it's not something I've really focused on or asked about. Uh-oh. Okay, actually, I'm going to take this one because this is a bugaboo of mine. It's a pet peeve of mine. Let's see here. So Do the Evolution 78 says Sony's talking about a PS6 and Sony fans aren't happy with how they treated the PS5. Yeah, these fuckers weren't happy that I leaked the PS5 Pro. What was it? I first started talking about it in 2022, maybe 21, 3 years before it came out. And I said in the leak, guys, remember, it's not coming out this year. It's coming out in a few years. And a lot of PlayStation fans were like, this is anti-consumer. Oh, I'm so mad, that they would be working on a Pro so early. And then 3 years went by, and what happened? The PS5 Pro sold incredibly well. So anyone mad about a PlayStation 6 being talked about, it's not coming out now. In 3 or 4 years, you'll be chomping at the bit for a new console. I just don't get why people don't get that. That'd be like Jensen Wang saying there's going to be a 6090, and they're like, already? It's like, well, yeah, I mean, every 2 or 3 years there's a new 90. Come on. Someone said I missed a question here. Don't see the one I would have missed. Bucci says, this life started, still waiting on my super chat. Bucci, retype. Let me see. Well, you're replying to something that I did already respond to, Bucci. So, no, I did respond to that. See, any final questions here? Maybe you go back to laptop. Okay, so maybe this is a good one too to close on. Let's see. So, Dead AI writes in. Also, thank you for the tip, Black Sands again. Dead AI writes in, for the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, which you can ask questions right there right now for free, and says, would AMD go back to laptop dedicated GPUs, or is it all APU from now on? Yeah, let's make this the final time stamp laptop APU. Okay, future. So what I'm going to say is this. I've got like full diagrams and like schematics and stuff for some upcoming AMD APUs at this point. And there's a lot of them, like a lot. Like without going into specifics or saying all of their code names, to me, it sounds, and again, don't clip this and say I'm confirming this. This is just kind of like overall how you should think of it. It seems to me there's likely a top Halo, mid-range Halo, Medusa Point, budget Medusa Point thing. Then over here, some other like thing for like mid-range gaming, possibly. Over here, something for the Steam Deck too. And then over here, a super budget APU down here. So what is that like? Like they're working on like 8 or more APUs, and you've really seen this like from before. They do more and more every generation, right? Like what was it? There was Rembrandt and Mendocino, and that was basically it to my memory. Was and the Steam Deck, I guess, right? So the first time you really saw Sony, Freudian slip. The first time you really saw AMD pushing a lot of APUs, because they were, I'd argue, a little lazy at first. Like they basically had 1 or 2 every gen, and that was it. And then they had the Steam Deck APU, Van Gogh have RDNA 2, Mendocino, a budget one with RDNA 2, and Rembrandt Zen 3 Plus and RDNA 2 all come out relatively around the same time. I'm going to group those together, even though some of them are Zen 2 and some of them are Zen 3 Plus. Sue me, I'm going to group them together. Like you had we'll call them the RDNA 2 family of APUs. There are like 3. Right. Then we move over to the RDNA 3 ones with like Phoenix. What did we have? We had Phoenix, and then we had Little Phoenix. So still really only 2. And then I guess like you could argue the Z1 Extreme was like a cost optimized version. It's really just Phoenix. And then what? Okay, well then we go on to Hawk Point, really the same thing. But then we get to RDNA 3 and we have Medusa Halo, Medusa Point. I believe there's a little Medusa, not Medusa, Strix Halo, Strix Point, and there's a little Strix coming out or something. I believe it's out there. There's Kraken as well. And I think there might be another Kraken. There might be a budget Kraken. So now we've gone from having like 1 APU to like 2 or 3 every gen to now it seems like Halo, Point, Kraken to like 4. So you got a full stack right there, really, until you get into mid-range graphics. I think you're going to go for where they had 1, 2, now 4. You're going to have Halo, mid-range Halo, Point, budget Point, Kraken successor, maybe a cost-optimized gaming one to go for the mid-range hard without having too many cores is kind of what I've heard about one of them too, which is really exciting for gaming laptops, by the way. Again, make sure you're subscribed. I got fun stuff coming out soon. And then you're also going to have like a Steam Deck APU, probably a Mendocino successor, like, whatever. Like, I think we're going to enter into a world where they're going to have like a stack of like 6 or to 8 APUs in a given generation. And it's going to be targeting all different types of things, whether it's a handheld one, a gaming laptop one, a Mac Pro competitor, and a budget Mac Pro competitor, like Apple does actually. And then the mainstream point and then a budget point, like all of that's going to be captured. But I still think there's room. Where's Dead AI, I believe, who asked this question. I still think there's room for dedicated graphics cards. And I think if it were up to me, AMD would probably just make 2 at most, though. Well, 2 dies, I should say. Right now, if they wanted to, they could make a 990M that probably is competitive with the 5090 laptop edition, or somewhat competitive if they gave it more like 32 gigs of RAM. And yeah, I mean, they just take the Navi 48 and, it doesn't have to throttle as much because it uses way less power than the 5080 die that's used for the 5090 laptop edition. Something like that. I think AMD should keep doing every generation. But outside of that, the only other thing I would suggest is maybe a budget GPU, just because some competitors will just want to bundle like Kraken with a GPU, and that's what you make that for. But that's what I think, Dead AI. A long-winded way of answering. Trying to hype you up, though, about future content, to be fair. Of course, now I need to turn down my mic again. Thank you, YouTube, for trying to make me crack all the time. Long story short, though, like, I think there will always be room for at least one flagship gaming laptop GPU. But moving forward, I really think most of their lineup should be APUs. So I don't think GPUs are dead. I don't think they will ever be dead AI. There are power and size constraints that make you have to make a GPU that's its own thing sometimes, at least for the foreseeable future. But I do think there's no reason most of the lineup shouldn't be APUs, because it's just cheaper. And I'm going to get into this with my review for, I have a Strix Halo product. I'm going to review that, and I'm going to talk about why I actually think Strix Halo is going to start getting a lot cheaper, and it is getting cheaper. I got this for like half the price it launched at, less than half, depending on which model you're talking about and which day. And I'm watching as these Strix Halo HP laptops are slowly getting cheaper. And I think we're going to enter a world, assuming we don't get screwed by trade wars or something, where Kraken laptops, which are like what the performance of almost a 1650 Max Q, and Hawkpoint laptops, you're going to have those for like $700. You're going to see Strix points move towards. I mean, this person in the chat recently pointed out a Strix Point mini PC was only 360. I mean, that's really cheap. I think you're going to see Strix Point, which is kind of like 3050 Max Q performance. That's going to gravitate towards about $1,000. And then you're going to see the more budget Strix Halos probably go towards 1500 and the flagships 2000. So that's where I think this is going to move in the future as well, right? You're going to have like the mid-range gaming focused APUs for $1,500 laptops, like Medusa Point, probably, and eventually in $1,200 laptops, giving you probably 3050 performance, maybe 3060. I don't know. We'll see. Don't quote that. We'll see. I'm not promising you, but you could see that like Point competes with 4050 or 5050. Halo competes with 60, 70, and 8, maybe 80. And then AMD has one flagship GPU they put into laptop that is there to compete with the 90 class. And I think that's what they're going to do moving forward. So again, very long-winded way of ebbing and flowing through my points about APUs and dedicated graphics on laptop. But I think that's what you should look at the future as. And that's a good thing, because APUs are not as limited by VRAM. I'm going to say it right now. Like, before even getting to the review, this is the most stable system I've used in my life. Wendell at Level 1 Tech said the same thing. It is the most stable system. APUs have less bugs, less problems. It is the future. It really is, unless you need ultimate performance. And so we shouldn't be scared of that. That's better laptops if that's the future we're living in. Let's see here. Any final things? Most of you just talking with each other. iScope says, I appreciate you, Tom. Thank you. iScopes. Medusa Point confirmed for 12 cores CCDs. Yeah, I've confirmed Medusa. I have pictures of Zen 6, guys. Yes, it has 12 core CCDs. I've seen some people say there's no way. It does. Okay, it does. You won't believe some of the CCDs. Again, I don't want to get ahead of a leak I've got coming out. They got some pretty funny core counts coming. I'm going to tell you that too for some of their products. All right. Yeah, I think I'm going to end it there. I'm clearly starting to ramble, and I'm getting exhausted here on this Friday evening. So once again, everybody, thank you for watching. I like this video, share this video. This is really big news, and make sure you're subscribed to the Moore's Law Said YouTube channel. Please make sure you're subscribed. Half of you usually aren't on any given month. And on top of that, I have to do this. Please check out the Moore's Law Said Patreon. We just had a new die shrink come out. It's over an hour-long video talking about the future of APUs, early testing of Strix Halo. Lowest tier on Patreon gets access to it, and multiple die shrinks a month, a catalog of hundreds of die shrinks, access to a Discord where you can speak with me, AMD engineers, game developers. It's very well moderated. There's thousands of supporters, and they can talk to you in a peaceful way, unlike in some comment sections. So I'm really trying to get those Patreon numbers up right now, because that is what allows us to make whatever content we want without worrying as much about sponsors. And all the content on the Patreon, including ad-free broken silicons, as it says in the name, ad-free, are ad-free. So you get extra ad-free content there as well. Please, I implore you, go into the description and go to the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon. Check it out and please join us there. And I will catch you on the Discord if you do and continue this conversation with you after this video is over. All right. Again, thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for listening. Have a great week. Great weekend. I'm tired and should stop talking. Goodbye.